Hey everyone, my name is Nina. Welcome to Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm here tonight with my producer, Edgar. You want to say hi, Edgar?
Yes, I do.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. I know right now I'm not actually streaming onto YouTube. I'm not sure what's going on with my account that allows, I'm trying to stream to Periscope so that I can have this on Twitter, which is where I am right now. But I also do want it to go to YouTube, but the software I'm using for that, it's giving me trouble. So I'm just on Twitter tonight, but that's okay. I'll re-upload this on YouTube when I get home. But thank you all for watching and tuning in. I'm sorry I won't be able to read the YouTube live chat because of that, though. So I guess it'll just be kind of like me, pontificating tonight. Also, Edgar, I'll just make him chime in more. But thank you so much for being here and tuning in. I have a great show for you guys. I had prepared tonight to talk about free speech and gun rights as they pertain to the Property Manifesto and stick just to that. But earlier today, I went to the Capitol and I testified in favor of a bill that would have repealed our red flag law here in Colorado. And I just would, it's just eclipsing my thoughts right now. So I'm going to talk about that first, and then I'll talk about free speech. And with St. Patty's Day next week, after that, I will talk about St. Patrick. And that way you guys can learn a little bit more about why St. Patrick's actually a saint and why he is the patron saint of Ireland. So, but let's start with what happened earlier today. So I was telling Edgar a little bit about this, but not too much detail. But there was a bill proposed in our House, and it went to our House Judiciary Committee here in Colorado, and it was in effect going to repeal the red flag law that had been passed, I don't know, sometime within the last year. I don't remember exactly when it was signed into law. But for those who are not familiar with red flag laws or don't know what's going on with the Colorado red flag law in particular, and I actually don't know much about red flag laws in other jurisdictions, but the red flag law here in Colorado is essentially, what they're trying to do with this, or what they're claiming to do, is they're trying to say that, listen, if you have a family member that thinks that you're a threat to yourself or others, maybe we should be able to restrict your access to guns. Now, in and of itself, I actually have problems with that, right? Because it's like, who's to say that a family member can't lie, and what's the standard there? But the real issue is how this law is written, because it's not just that it violates the Second Amendment, in my opinion, and also Article 13, I believe, of the Colorado Constitution, but it also violates the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, as well as the same clause, or the mirroring clause of that in the Colorado Constitution as well, which is the amendment that says that no citizen shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. And the reason why the red flag law here violates that is because, let me just lay out a scenario that could happen. So, and this could be even the most vanilla scenario, one where, this is actually the ideal case. But let's say you're a mother and you have but maybe you have a college-age, son who lives in your home, and he's been exhibiting some really strange behaviors. Maybe he's been, in his journals, he talks a lot about death or killing people, and maybe he's, killed animals or done some other kind of weird stuff. And so what that mother could do under this red flag law is go to a court and tell them that he is a danger to himself or others. Now, it's not that in and of itself is a problem. The issue is that when she does that, what the court can do is basically issue a warrant to come confiscate those weapons without giving notice to the individual whose weapons they're confiscating, without that individual having the right to be at the hearing that determines whether or not they're a danger to themselves or others, and without any kind of real processing time on that. Like, this can happen really quickly. The other issue is that at these hearings, it's called an ex parte hearing, by the way, when the individual who's, or when one of the parties isn't there, right? So the individual whose liberty at stake isn't there, and you're just, so the family member's going to the court and saying we need to take this individual's weapons away. The standard in these hearings is the preponderance of the evidence. And for people who aren't legal scholars, preponderance of the evidence is a legal standard similar to, or not similar in terms of gravity, but similar in terms of classification to beyond a reasonable doubt. So, in America, if you are going to be convicted of a crime, you have to be proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury of your peers, or peers in quotes, whatever that means, right? But in this instance, instead of beyond a reasonable doubt, the standard that the mother in that instance would have to meet is preponderance of the evidence. And to give you a little bit of an idea of the difference between preponderance of the evidence and beyond a reasonable doubt, beyond a reasonable doubt is something where you feel strongly enough about it that you would be willing to put big money on it, or maybe even risk your own safety, like betting on it, right? So you have to be very confident. It's not 100%, but you have to be very confident for beyond a reasonable doubt to be met. And they explain that in jury instructions if you're on a jury for a criminal trial. But preponderance of the evidence, this is the standard that is used in civil cases. And what that means is basically 51%, more likely than not. So think about that for a second. What the red flag law does is it says that you can be deprived of a constitutional right without notice, without the right to appear and face your accuser, and the only standard that your accuser needs to meet is more likely than not, 51%. And those of you who have read case law from the Supreme Court know that to deprive an individual of a constitutional right, you really have to have a good reason to do that. You can't just do that willy-nilly, and that is why in criminal law we have beyond the reasonable doubt as a standard, because we don't want it to be easy to take your liberties away. That's the whole purpose of that. So anyway, this horrible bill went into law in Colorado, and our governor signed this, and him signing this, in addition to him signing the popular vote to trump the Electoral College bill, that I also think warrants him being recalled from office. And I did sign the petition to have him recalled because he's done a mess of things. But so today I went to the Capitol. I was there with Antonia Cover, formerly Antonia Okafor, and we testified with a few other organizations as well regarding this bill that was going to repeal the red flag law. So I testified in favor of that, which I'd never done before. That was kind of fun. And if you care about, I don't know, legislation and all of that, I do encourage you to give it a try, because I did really enjoy myself, and it was nice to face, the people in government and tell them what I really think. But I wasn't mean or anything. I used the law, all of that, but it was nice to actually express myself in court. So, or not in court, at the state capitol. So if you haven't ever done that, it's really easy. In most states, any layperson can go in and testify. But the reason I kind of want to go on a rant about this, like I actually wasn't planning on talking about this, but the reason why I kind of want to talk about it is because when I got home later, I tuned in to listen live to the voting results. And to be honest, as an attorney, I spend a lot of time in court, but I don't spend a lot of time focusing on the legislative process. Like in general, I know how a bill becomes a law, right? It gets proposed, it has to go through a committee, and then the committees, it might have to go through a few committees. Like it might have to go through one regarding the subject matter, and then one regarding money, like the Appropriations Committee. And then after that, then the House can maybe vote on it, like they have to read it a few times, and then it gets passed to the Senate, and then the governor can sign it. But sometimes the people might have to vote on it. So, it's generally I knew the process. But I didn't know just how easy it was to kill a bill in a committee. Because I listened to the votes, and the bill actually had enough votes to move forward. And it had enough the motion to send it to the Appropriations Committee was seconded and, approved. But immediately after that, there was a motion to table it indefinitely, and that was seconded, and the bill was dead. And that's it. So, and maybe I'm just like, I should have known this. Like, I'm just naive. But what really is alarming to me about this more so is that the original red flag law, the one that I just described, that passed through this committee process that requires essentially unanimous approval. And that committee had both Republicans and Democrats on it. So it was not a situation where, it's like, oh, it's just a bunch of Democrats who pushed that through. It's like, no, both sides passed this law that just wildly violates due process and the Second Amendment. And it could get through committee to, get passed, but it can't get through committee to be repealed. So, and as I'm sure Edgar agrees with me on this point, and as all we libertarians know, it's really, really hard to get rid of a law once it's passed. It's almost impossible to repeal something. I mean, just look at the federal government with Obamacare, right? The Republicans keep getting control of all three branches of government, and then they still end up not being able to repeal it. They can't repeal it. They won't do it. So that was an eye-opening experience, because the truth is, like, I've always been sort of a proponent of local governments are a little bit better. But talking to Antonia and hearing about what's happening in Texas with their legislature and seeing what's happening here in Colorado, a little bit of my faith in our institutions died today. So that was pretty brutal. But.
And we need people to understand that, like, now.
Right? Yeah. Like, the fact that I didn't know that information is pretty sad. But what that means probably, because I'm a lawyer, I mean, I actually did, I do actually generally understand the legislative process, but even I didn't know how easy it was to kill a bill. But I also, I didn't given how easy it is to kill a bill, I just still can't believe how much horrible legislation gets passed. Like, I just don't understand. And I found out that both of my representatives here in Colorado, in the Senate and the House, voted in favor of the red flag law. I looked that up today. So that is just horribly disappointing. It made me want to run for office, and I have never wanted to do that before. So it just goes to show. But one other thing that I thought was really alarming about this, so the head of the Colorado House Judiciary Committee, his name is Mike Weissman, okay? So after everyone testified, Mike Weissman and I guess everyone on the committee really, when they made their votes, they explained why. And I was really happy to hear several of the people who voted yes cited constitutional reasons, due process reasons, things like that. But Chairman Weissman, he voted no. And the reason he voted no was because he said something along the lines of, while there might be constitutional concerns here, we haven't really gotten to try it out. And that's paraphrasing, admittedly. But if you go, you can listen to the whole testimony on on the House's website or on the Colorado Legislature's website. And actually, you can hear me testify if you want to. It'll be on there on the recording, and Antonia as well. But the idea that the head of the House Judiciary Committee would think that it's appropriate to dismiss constitutional concerns because something has not been sufficiently tried yet is just, I don't know. It makes me want to rip my hair out. that's what I think of that. So, because in all honesty, like, don't these people have to swear on a constitution, or not on a constitution, swear over a Bible, which matters more, swear over a Bible that they're going to abide by? Because we're talking about Colorado legislatures. So not only do they have to abide by the federal constitution, but they have to abide by the Colorado Constitution too. So Mr. Chairman Weissman is willing to dismiss the constitutional issues regarding several amendments and articles in the Bill of Rights just because we haven't gotten to try it out yet. Now, mind you, we weren't the only people testifying there. Police officers and law enforcement also were in favor of repealing the red flag law because it's a mess. They've been trying to enforce it. And it's really, the language is confusing and vague. And they've been having problems because there's all these, it's mixed up between mental health and like if someone's dangerous, like is it about someone being mentally ill or is it about someone making threats? So the police just don't know how to enforce this. So there were multiple sheriffs there testifying to repeal the red flag law. But the truth is, and I was talking to my husband about this, the red flag law isn't just dangerous for us as citizens and our rights getting infringed, okay? I mean, it's horribly dangerous for that. It's one of the worst pieces of legislation I have ever seen. But, because realistically, they can just kick in your door without notice and say, we're taking your guns. But is that really safe for a police officer? To be kicking in the door of someone who they know has firearms without that person having notice? I mean, this is dangerous. People are gonna get shot, man. This is not gonna be a situation where it's gonna be like, hi, police, we're here to confiscate your firearms, please.
People have been shot already too.
Right? Like it's gone poorly already. I wish that I had more detailed examples of the specific cases, but people were testifying to them today. And I would recount some of what they said, but I'm sure I would get some of the details wrong. So I'm not going to try to do that. But really, people have been shot already. Police officers have been put in danger already. And it's not like I'm always so concerned about the police, but I just think that, the House Judiciary Committee had a combination of police officers and civilians testifying regarding the illegality, the inefficiency, and the dangerousness of this bill. And the head of the House Judiciary Committee was willing to disregard all of those concerns because it, quote unquote, hadn't been tried enough yet. Ugh. I'm just livid, man. I don't know what to think about it. But it's, at least here in Colorado, we do have term limits. Like people can only be in our legislature for so many terms. I think it's like 4.
It depends if you are as a representative. So if you're in the state house,
yeah.
Either way, it's a total of 8 years. That's all it could be.
That's all it can be.
So if you're a state representative, you serve 2-year terms, and you can serve 4 of them. And if you are a state senator, you serve 4-year terms.
And you can serve 2 of them.
And you can serve 2 of them. So either way, it's 8 years. And to be honest with you, I think that's 8 consecutive. So I think once you're done doing the 8, you can take.
Oh, you can jump back in?
Yeah, don't hold me to that.
Yeah,
but
I'd have to look that up.
Yeah.
Because the truth is, it's like the idea of running and being in a state legislature, I haven't even thought about that really. And the federal government is so invasive and intrusive that I spend so much time focusing on them. But our government has just been really off the rails, and I don't think Coloradans are aware of it, because when Antonia and I were headed back, our Uber driver picked us up from the courthouse and asked us what we were doing there. And we kind of like danced around what bill we were there to testify about, because you don't want to tick off your Uber driver. But he was pro 2A too. So, we were in good company. But he had no idea that the red flag law had been passed at all. He had never heard of it. And he is pro 2A, and he had no idea that that was even introduced, that it was passed, that it existed.
And that's why I keep saying the 2A community is going to die.
Because they're not paying attention, man.
They are, and far from it, and far from going to the state capitol, because me personally, I don't like that process. I don't necessarily believe in it 100% because it accomplishes nothing. But if this individual who's into guns is not talking to other individuals about guns, that means less people are hearing about it.
Yeah.
And it's the Dave Chappelle thing. And Dave Chappelle's not the only one that brought it up, but it's the more recent one when he was talking to that transgender individual. It's like the more you talk about it, the more normal it becomes, the more you normalize it. So nobody talks about guns, so there's not enough new people hearing about it. And
It's true. And I mean, there are people talking about it, but I don't think that people are talking about it with enough focus on what our government's actually doing, People will go online and rail all of their Second Amendment arguments, but in terms of like actually training with their firearm, even actually having firearms, like a lot of people who are pro 2A might not even have one, which is, I mean, you don't have to have one. But I just think that there's not really, the 2A community, like what is that really? I don't know. I don't really know what we're doing. There's certainly organizations within the 2A community that are fighting good fights and who are pushing for constitutional carry and stuff like that and have actually achieved that in certain places. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of devastating to see how few people know about this stuff who do care about the Second Amendment. Because the truth is, their due process regarding the Second Amendment got just obliterated. And a lot of people don't even know it. So it's really alarming. And the truth is that our media is just not reporting on these things. So, and if they are, they're reporting on it in a positive way. Like, oh, look at this great bill that will allow us to get the guns out of the hands of dangerous people. But, it's like what is it, 51%? That's the other thing about this bill, okay? What it says is that a family member can go to the court and ask for this protection order regarding your guns. I mean, that's the official term. But family member is defined to include anyone in your immediate family, and that extends to like your uncle and stuff. It could be like that. Anyone that you've lived with in the last 6 months. So a roommate, an ex-boyfriend, it's like, talk about scorned lovers being able to screw somebody over.
Now I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
Okay.
Because I hear this argument. I fight with other 2A groups a lot. And for those, I hope you don't mind me plugging.
No, plug. Do whatever.
For those that don't know, I run Guns for Everyone.
Oh, I plug that every show. What are you talking about? You can definitely plug that.
I don't want to step on toes. But so I argue this all the time because I say this bill really, although it's a horrible bill, we can't be hyperbolic about it in what it says. So a lot of people think that just anybody can red flag you. And the reality is anybody can fill out the petition. It doesn't mean it's actually going to work.
That's true.
The state of Colorado has already surprised us, I think, on 3 occasions when people filled it out. The most notable one is of the police officer at CU that he was red flagged, and the law struck it down because it said, no, you have no kids in common. Mm-hmm. She lied about that stuff. In fact, I believe the lady was charged with perjury.
Oh.
They raided her house. So
yeah, don't.
what I'm trying to get at is, for me, as somebody who grew up in the hood, somebody who grew up in the ghetto, I'm Mexican. I grew up in the hood. Not that you have to be Mexican to grow up in the hood, but uh, just to give a little context.
That was Edgar's words, y'all. Those weren't mine.
And that stuff has always happened. Like your neighbor can call the cops on you right now, with or without a red flag, and say that you're being dangerous with the gun, and guess what the cops would end up having to do? Come over and investigate, potentially take your guns, take you to jail, because that already happened. We just didn't call it a red flag. People just did it.
I guess the difference is that even in that instance, though, you would be, like, you still would be there for the hearing to actually determine if your guns were taken away. Like, even if you were arrested or whatever.
But you weren't there for the phone call that your neighbor made, and you didn't understand that the cops were coming. Your neighbor just seen you loading or unloading guns and said that you were a crazy nut job, and then all of a sudden you got the cops at your door.
I mean, but you still like the cops still would have to go to a court and establish at minimum probable cause, and then they would have a warrant, but the warrant would only be effective for, so long as you would go, like, the part of the issue with the red flag law too is that it's not like you can just show up at the next time. I mean, they have a permanent orders hearing where you can prove that you're not a danger.
Correct.
But that's proving a negative, which is, that's kind of 50-50 in and of itself. I still think it should be on them to prove that you're still a danger. You shouldn't have to prove that you're not. They should have to prove that you are.
Like most court cases?
Yeah. But even if it was the other way around, though, where at that second hearing they still had to prove it, it still should be, in my opinion, at least a beyond a reasonable doubt standard, because your liberty's being taken away. And I don't know, the idea that you don't even get to be there, because you're right. In either instance, you're not there for the tip, but the fact that you're not there for the hearing that actually determines your fate is kind of different, because it's one of those things where once they meet the standard in the first hearing, it's a lot easier to satisfy it in the next one. And you're right. I mean, if they perjure themselves to establish that they're a family member, I mean, that's going to be caught immediately. But let's say you really are a family member, like you're a legitimate family member. Maybe it is like a baby daddy situation or something like that. But in that is one of the qualifications to be a family member, if you're the parents of the same child. So even if you've never been married, it specifically says that. So if you're in a baby daddy situation, and you've got like a scorned ex-lover in that situation, they can go to the court and just say that you're dangerous. They could say, listen to how they've been with our child, How are they gonna prove that you didn't do that stuff? Or how are you gonna prove that you didn't do the stuff that they said? I don't know. But I just think that there's a lot of holes in it, and I understand what they're trying to do, and I even understand your devil's advocate point on that, because I also have I think the standard for probable, or what probable cause is too low, in my opinion. They've basically made that I think a crime's happening. That's pretty much what probable cause is, or reasonably, I think a crime is happening. But in this instance, I mean, I just think that it just railroads all of our attempts at protecting our constitutional rights through the court system, as flawed as they may be, because they do have flaws in and of themselves. And it's true. I mean, a police officer could come and try to arrest you in the middle of the night, based on a tip from a neighbor or something like that. But in effect, what they get is a warrant to seize your firearms based on a 51% standard, and you're not, no notice, you don't get to be there. I mean, it's just, and it's not even a situation, because the truth is, for a crime, what happens is after an arrest, you have a bail hearing, and unless it's for something like murder or something really extreme, you usually can bond out and be free again until your trial. But in this instance, it's like you lose your right to your firearm, you go to this second hearing, and if you lose it then, you have, like, your right to bear arms is gone for a year. And the only appeal you have is to the same judge who already took them away. That's the other thing. You can't appeal to a different judge. It's to the same judge, which just, that's not even an appeal. I mean, that's basically just asking the judge to change his mind. There's no way to say, listen, this judge messed up. And we've always had an appellate process. I mean, it's just, there's so many issues with it. And for it to not be repealed today was just really sad. I mean, I knew it wasn't going to happen, but I just was like, I don't know, I looked all these individuals in the eye and was talking to them about these issues, and not just my concerns about the law, but my concerns, like, as a woman and as a private citizen who wants to make sure that she can protect herself. And ultimately I said, the worst part of this is not only is it endangering my right to defend myself, but it's doing that without even affording me due process. And so it's really bad, guys. I hope that, and the truth is, these laws have been passed in a lot of states. Colorado's not, like, unique in this at all.
And it's going to keep happening.
And it's going to keep happening, and they'll probably get more extreme, not less.
Yeah, especially because the gun industry has already, or the gun community, again, like you said, like whatever that means, has already proven that as soon as a law passes, give it about 3-4 years, and all they're going to start doing is like, well, that's the law, we have to follow it.
Well, no, it's the law, though.
It's the law. We have to.
And we're law-abiding gun owners.
We have to abide. But before a law passes, you've seen Virginia come and take it, blah, blah, blah. And Virginia passed basically
they passed all of it.
Everything they wanted to accept one.
Yeah.
And everybody claimed victory for one.
Yeah, I saw an article, or a few articles, being like, oh, look, this rally worked. But then I saw that a lot of other stuff went through, so...
so they give up on one so that everybody celebrated and...
So people could say we had a victory.
And it's not victory.
It's
gun
not.
Community, you got to stop saying we're victorious in something. We play defense every single year. You can't say we're winning if every single year we're on defense. We're never on offense.
Right,
Always
and we're
defense.
in the hole, man. We're
Big
already
time.
way...
100 years behind.
Yeah, we've been losing for decades on this. I mean, it's not like we're starting at, look at this perfect Second Amendment, we have to protect it. Like, the Second Amendment is already so infringed upon. But what's alarming about this to me is that it's not even just the Second Amendment anymore. Now they're kind of just like, oh, this whole due process thing. Like, do we really need that? And that scares the shit out of me. I don't like that one bit. But I've probably ranted about this for at least a half an hour, so I can move on to something else. And again, I'm sorry that I don't have a live chat tonight, but I would love to, like, on my Periscope, I'd love to see or hear your comments. I hope you guys are chatting about this, because really it's just horrible. And the Second Amendment protects the First, and if we lose the First, then we lose everything. So if we lose the Second, we lose everything. And if we lose due process, then we might lose the Second. So just please pay attention to all of this. Pay attention to what your state legislatures do. Because the truth is, you actually might be able to have a bigger impact on them. But I don't know. After today, I don't know. I do think a few of them were convinced by me, though. Because when they were saying how they voted, some of them referenced almost exact sentences of mine. I'm just saying. But I digress. So let's move on to the Property Manifesto. I'm going to continue on in my series of issues. And I think what I'm going to start doing, I want to do individual rights before I get into anything about government or enforcement or things like that. So, and that's why I was going to do free speech and gun rights today. And I did talk about gun rights a lot, but not with a Property Manifesto lens. I'm just going to focus on free speech today. Because like I said, the Second Amendment protects the First. So let's start with some of the things in the First Amendment and go from there. So maybe I should establish a little bit about where free speech is in our country right now. Culturally, it's a hot mess, okay? I'm not gonna lie. People are really scared to express themselves. People are scared of being canceled, getting fired, social repercussion, families being, divided over political issues. People have gotten divorced over like the 2016 election. So, in terms of culture and our free speech, it's in a dangerous place. But in terms of our Supreme Court jurisprudence and actual like statutes on the books, our free speech legislation and Supreme Court rulings in America are surprisingly good. It's really strange how they have managed to be so good on this, because on so many other issues they're just so terrible. But what the First Amendment says, of course, is Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. The Supreme Court has taken that very seriously. To give you an example of some of the things that the Supreme Court has said are okay, you can burn an American flag, obviously. You can say negative things about politicians, of course. And for a politician to win a defamation lawsuit, or any public figure really, it's a much higher standard. They actually have to show malice. So, I mean, you could say pretty much whatever you want about government officials. I was listening and reviewing, or listening to some lawyers talk about and reviewing a few cases on free speech. They said that in effect, like the Klan having a protest or whatever, or like marching through the streets, that was okay. They have said that Jehovah's Witnesses, who were basically doing some kind of radio show where they talked exclusively about how Catholics were wrong, was fine. And because they said that like all religions are welcome and criticism of all religions is also welcome. Speech that is the most protected is political and ideological speech. That is held in the highest protection in terms of restriction. Laws that try to restrict speech that that try to restrict the content of speech, like you can't say X, like for example, if they tried to pass a law that said you couldn't be like a climate change denier, whatever the fuck that means. But if they passed a law like that, that would be presumptively unconstitutional because you can't regulate the content of speech. So to the extent that the Supreme Court has allowed regulations on speech, it's been more pertaining to method of speech and location of speech, which, those are restrictions where it's like, I don't know. Are those really valid? We can get into that. But I just wanted to make clear that this is actually something that I'm relatively proud of our Supreme Court for our First Amendment legislation, and I do not say that about our Supreme Court on many things. I'm just being real. But in terms of the Property Manifesto, the reason why it's so special in terms of a property issue is because it actually, free speech is a product of all four of your property rights. It's not just one or the other, like, your right to exclude from your property or like to kick trespassers off your property, like that's pretty much just your real property right. But your free speech, it's your real property, it's your personal property, it's your body, and it's your mind. So let's talk about it, shall we? So in terms of real property, this is really easy stuff, to be able to control, enjoy, all of that kind of stuff on your land. You get to say whatever you want on your own land, right? It's one thing if you're like blasting a megaphone and shouting things into like your neighbor's yard where you're like disrupting their, right to enjoy their land. But in general, if you're within your house, you can talk about whatever you want. You can say whatever you want. That's your property, and you can control, who's there. So if that's one of those things. It's like if you don't like someone else's speech, you can kick them off of your property. But you can say whatever kind of speech you want on your own property. And there's no better evidence of this than this. There's this house that I drive by every time I go to where my parents live, or my parents' neighborhood. And it's like kind of a little baby ranch. They have horses or whatever. But they always put up huge political signs. And they are hilarious. I remember, like, when Obama was elected, this is so stupid. They put up like a mannequin of someone like flashing somebody, like just showing their bare ass. And it was like, what do you think of this, Obama, and all your drones? Like, it was something crazy like that. But that's one of those things, it's like, if you want to put a mannequin of like someone flashing the road on your property, like that's your free speech actually, and that's your real property, free speech. That's an example of it. In terms of personal property, think about like your cell phone, right? So if you were talking to, like if I pick this up and call my husband, I call my parents, I can say whatever I want to them. The government can't, or shouldn't rather, if they're not violating your personal property rights, tell you how you can use or control your personal property or enjoy your personal property. And it's the same thing, with, I have my notes here. Oh, sorry. I have my notes here for the podcast. This is me utilizing my personal property for my freedom of speech, because I am using my pen, my paper, all of that to express my ideas. And here's the other thing too. All of these cameras, utilizing the computer. I mean, it's actually not my computer, it's Edgar's computer. He's given me an easement on the computer. But all of this stuff is me and Edgar utilizing our personal property to, express and use our free speech, our freedom of speech. So those are kind of those two. They're pretty basic. In terms of your property of body, it makes sense, right? I mean, you have the right to control your body, so you control your mouth, your tongue, your voice. Just think about if you're, I'm a classically trained opera singer, which I know is kind of a strange fun fact. But yeah, so in college, I was in Carmen, I was in the Magic Flute, and you have to actually exercise a lot of control over your body to be able to sing like that. And when you're doing voice lessons, it's all about essentially learning how to control your vocal cords in a way where you can project to a massive crowd like that, or in a massive, why can't I think of the word? Oh, a venue like that, as an opera singer. And even like my testimony today, that was me using my body. I had to use some self-restraint in my body to not swear. But that was me speaking, using my body, my physical presence to use my freedom of speech. So that's that. And in terms
you didn't cuss?
Huh?
You didn't cuss?
I did not cuss.
I did.
You did?
Yeah.
I thought you said you never did that.
No, I've done it, but I don't agree with the process. So I've done it. Mm-hmm. And that's really why I know nothing's going to happen. In fact, my friend was the chairman, and that's probably why I didn't get kicked out. He was the chairman of that committee.
Oh, yeah.
He's a Democrat. So he knew I was going to go in there and talk some shit. Mm-hmm. And I told him that they were all full of shit.
That's your free speech, man.
Yeah. He said the only reason I didn't kick you out was because I know you.
Well, it's probably true. And actually, this is something that I found out from Antonia, and I guess I should have known about it, but it's in Texas, so I don't pay attention to Texas as much. But
no one should.
I know, people care too much about Texas, whatever. But in essence, it was a situation similar to what I did today, where someone went in, and this is a free speech issue, but someone went in and they had a shirt that said "fuck the police" on, and they were testifying. I guess it was pro-gun in some fashion. But as a result of that, they now changed the rules and said that you can't, he wouldn't be allowed to wear that shirt and have testimony. But this is a whole free speech issue, right? Because especially in terms of our jurisprudence, that's public property.
Well, do you know that in our chamber, if you went there with anything political, any political message?
Yeah, you're not allowed to wear political stuff in our chamber. It was, I got that notice when I or when I found out that this was happening, and I looked into the procedure, I found out that I don't really wear political stuff anyway,
Correct.
but yeah, but I think it's one of those things where I think that if wearing a shirt especially, it's one thing if you're up in there making a big ruckus, you know, because people are there to try to express their opinions, and if we are going to have a legislative process where people can come in and say their piece, you know, we don't want it to be a circus. But if it's on a t-shirt, I mean, that's not affecting anybody. The only people who could even see it are the committee members. It's like, ooh, heaven forbid I have to see like a swear word. Or that I have to see something against the police, or that I would have to see something political. But that was one thing that I thought was interesting, just to go back to that for a second. When I finished my testimony, people tried to applaud. And I only bring that up because the chairman was like, shh, we don't applaud. You know, he was like, because people have differing political views on this, like we don't applaud testimony. Which I guess it's like fair enough. I mean, it's not a debate stage, like it's not televised, but I just think it's interesting. It's like people can't express their approval for what was said. So anyway, those are all, whether or not the rules within the decorum of the legislature need to change is a totally different situation, because that whole thing's a mess. But in terms of your mind, property of mind, to get back to that, this is really kind of the development of what you're going to say. So, you know, I spent a decent amount of time thinking about what I was going to talk about tonight, deciding the topics. And ultimately, even right now, just to speak, you have to use your consciousness to be able to form your sentences. Because, I mean, realistically, I'm up here talking for an hour or so. And this is all, you guys are basically hearing my stream of consciousness on these particular issues. And that is my property of mind. My ability and freedom to express my stream of consciousness verbally is my freedom of speech. So the freedom of speech is not an exclusionary property right. It's really one more about enjoyment and control of your property. And obviously, you know, you can get into some of the stuff like conveying your speech. I mean, that's selling books, all of that kind of stuff. But I want to make clear that it's not, the freedom of speech is not a freedom in which you get to tell other people what their speech can be. Just, you know, and this gets into things like what's been happening in the transgender argument about pronouns. And the truth is, like I said in my, I think it was my property of body, I was going to say lecture. It's not a lecture, okay? In my explanation of the property of body, I think I discussed this briefly when I was talking about transgenderism. But the truth is, I would use whatever pronoun someone wants because, quite frankly, I don't care. I'll refer to you however you want. I might accidentally mess up, but it wouldn't be malicious, you know? I genuinely would try. I try to not offend people if I can help it. But for any kind of government or authoritarian institution to force you to speak a certain way would be a violation of your freedom of speech, not an enforcement of it. So it's not, it's like, there's no really like a right to exclude from my freedom of speech, except to the extent that no one can force you to speak. And that's kind of the basis of our Fifth Amendment, right? But that has been so destroyed over time too. But the whole idea is like, we can't force you to testify against yourself. And that's really a violation of your freedom of speech because, I mean, think about it. They're making you use your body and your mind to say things that would incriminate yourself. I can't think of a bigger violation of your, of your property rights than that, or your property of body and mind than that. But what's happened with our Fifth Amendment, and I don't know if you guys know this, but the Supreme Court has legislated that just to death. Like they have beaten that horse to death such that it only applies to a criminal trial, right? So it actually has to be an incriminating speech. You have to be the defendant. Like you actually have to be the one being incriminated. And you know what I mean? It's like they've picked it apart to the point where it only applies in very limited circumstances where you can even invoke it. You can't invoke it at all in a civil case. And personally, I think that this is some dangerous stuff because this is actually what got Irwin Schiff in trouble. But I actually think that the IRS violates the freedom of speech and the Fifth Amendment. And it's because they're forcing you to speak, right? They're forcing you to fill out a document with all, first of all, okay, not only are they forcing you to speak, they're forcing you to disclose private information. Every dime you made that year, you have to disclose by force. How is that not a violation of our freedom of speech? I don't understand that. But it certainly would be a violation of our freedom of speech in a property rights state. I mean, also because they're stealing your money. So that's your personal property. That's why taxation is theft. But yeah, so that's a little bit about free speech and that particular issue. I want to make sure that I hit on all of the bundle of sticks, though. I talked about control, possess. I mean, you possess your speech. That's a little bit harder. I mean, obviously you possess you possess your speech to the extent that it's transferred into a tangible medium that I can have here, but otherwise it just kind of goes into space, right? Like the sound waves just go on and you can't really possess it anymore. But in general, you possess your speech. So that's all part of it. I think I covered all of that, other than the right to destroy, I guess, which would be more so that if I wanted to delete all of these podcasts, I could. If I wanted to burn my notes, I could. And people try to, you know, have their right to destroy with freedom of speech all the time because they try to retract things they say constantly. I didn't mean that. I want to take that back. So anyway, that's a little bit about that particular issue. But really, it's like the freedom of speech is so crucial, man. I think that it's your foundational liberty. It's your liberty to express your consciousness with all to express your consciousness and all other forms of your property. And I talked about real property and all of that, and it gets into different issues. And I'm not even going to talk about it because in my property manifesto, like public property is a whole issue that we're going to have to discuss in a different podcast, okay? So to the extent that freedom of speech extends to public property, that's a different issue. But in terms of your own body, your own mind, what you do with your phone, what you do with your, your notebooks, all of that, that is all your property right, and part of why all rights are property rights. But with that, I'm going to move on to St. Patrick. So, unless, Edgar, do you have any comments on the freedom of speech before I move on?
Nope.
Nope. It's important, yeah? And I love my freedom of speech. I use it too much. Okay, so let's actually talk about St. Patrick for a second. So, obviously, people associate St. Patrick with Ireland at minimum because of St. Patrick's Day. But, people, and I was telling Edgar this before we started streaming, I did not even know the stories of some of these saints that I'm talking about until I started preparing for these podcasts. And I have to say, I mean, like what our holidays have turned into, like what these saints' feast days have turned into is always way off from what actually happened to the saint or what was going on with them. And these saints went through just horrible things. I mean, just terrible, even if they weren't martyred. I mean, just terrible stuff. So let's talk about St. Patrick, because it's not just about getting wasted and, being Irish and a pot of gold and all that nonsense. So St. Patrick, he actually was British. So I know that sounds kind of weird because he's the patron saint of Ireland, right? But this is what I'm saying about the crazy stuff that our saints went through, man. So St. Patrick was kidnapped by Irish pirates, brought to Ireland, and put into slavery. That story in and of itself is just crazy to me. Just the idea of an Irish pirate is kind of crazy to me. So he was on the Emerald Isle there. He was having to take care of pigs and livestock or something. And that happened when he was 16 years old. He was kidnapped and taken into slavery. He was in slavery for 6 years and eventually was able to escape. Some friendly friends of his, I don't know, people he met were able to help him escape and get back to the UK, or Britain, I guess. And he swore that he would never go back to Ireland because of these horrific things that he went through. But he had dreams about Ireland and was basically told in his dreams that he was going to bring Christianity to Ireland, and that was his mission. So he did. He actually went back to Ireland after having been a slave there for 60 years, and having been kidnapped there. And he went and he succeeded in pretty much converting almost the entire Isle of Ireland to Christianity. And Ireland has remained a very Catholic, Christian Catholic. They battle, right? The Protestants and the Catholics in Ireland battle a lot. That's actually why Northern Ireland is its own thing. But it was actually, in terms of even their laws, they had restrictions on abortion and other stuff like that until very recently. Ireland is a deeply Christian country. And it's mostly because of St. Patrick. And he would use the 3-leaf clover, not the 4-leaf clover, obviously, because it's not a real thing. And it also wasn't about luck. But he used it to try to explain and succeeded in explaining the Trinity. So the whole idea is, we have this one leaf, but it has these 3 very distinct parts, right? But it's still one whole. So the whole idea of God the Father, the Holy Spirit, and Christ all being one God, even though they're 3 distinct persons, he would use the shamrock to illustrate that. And because he was able to convert so much of Ireland, that is why he's the patron saint of Ireland, even though he is, in fact, a Brit. He was not, or to my knowledge, he was not martyred. But that whole slavery situation, I mean, that's just brutal. But, there's myths surrounding him, which don't really make sense, like that he drove all of the snakes out of Ireland. Part of the problem with that, to my knowledge, that there's never been snakes in Ireland. It's just not really a species that occurs on that island. So there's some myths about him. But he did manage to convert almost a whole country to Christianity. And he used the shamrock partially to do it. And I think that's pretty cute. So that's St. Patrick. And I do encourage people to celebrate St. Patrick's Day still because it's a lot of fun. It's actually one of my favorite holidays. In high school and college, those were some of the craziest parties I've ever been to, if I've been real, or some St. Patty's Day parties. I'm not sure how St. Patrick would feel about that. But, celebrate Ireland, celebrate the Shamrock, celebrate St. Patrick next week. And that's, I don't know, do you like St. Patrick? What do you think?
I've never met him. So.
I've never met the guy. Neither have I. But he sounds like he went through some shit and still managed to keep his faith through all of that, which is kind of amazing. And returned to Ireland, even though he swore he never would. So, but before I close, of course, I want to give Edgar another plug. So, first of all, I want to thank Edgar and Guns for Everyone for making this podcast possible. If you live in Colorado and you want to take a concealed carry class or, a training class just for your pistol, or, I actually might start teaching some classes on gun laws here in Colorado.
Nice.
So if you want to look into any of those classes, please go to Guns for Everyone, their website online, and support them as well. They also have standalone stores where you can buy firearms too. So thank you so much to Guns for Everyone and Edgar for making this podcast possible. And also, if you want to support this podcast, you could become a patron. My Patreon is Nina Down the Rabbit Hole. So if you just go there, you can become a patron. Thank you so much to Brett, who is my first patron, and I'm always thankful to him and for supporting this podcast. I also, in the description on YouTube, I'll have my crypto wallet on there. I am going to have a P.O. box soon for a mailing address. And I also think, I don't know, maybe I'll throw my Venmo on there or something. I don't know if you want to support this podcast. But really, if you really want to support me, the real way to do that is to share this. Because the way that this will become more successful is to have as many people as possible hear it and to hear this message about property rights and liberty and, a little bit of Christianity if they're willing to bear it. But thank you all so much for tuning in tonight. I'll try really hard to be back next week instead of like a month from now. And be free, guys. Bye.